Shima Jupasho Hidam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamninyatayami Sangye Jidam Soki Joknama Jonju Bardu Dakni Yasuchi Dagi Jinyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Benjir Sangye Drupasho Sangye Jidang Zogi Jognam Lam Jonju Vardu Dakni Gasuchi Dagi Jinyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Benjir Sangye Drupasho Sangye Jidang Zoki Chognam Lam Janju Bardu Dakni Gyapsuchi Dagi Jinyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Benjir Sangye Drupasho.
So please check your posture and your spine and see if you're sitting straight and comfortably for a few moments of meditation. I just ate lots of pizza, so it's hard to focus, but we'll see. So begin with your breath, please, focusing on each cycle of exhalation and inhalation. Being aware of the movement of the breath, especially at the tips of the nostrils. See if you can have single-pointed concentration on your breath without distraction and mental wanderings. Check in on your motivation as to why you're here. What do you want to get from this evening, being here? Be very clear in your mind and your heart what your goal is and what your hope and aspiration is. Make some sincere, heartfelt wish to achieve that. And feel holy beings coming here and filling the space around you and manifesting with you to help you with that. Imagine what it would be like to have them take you by the hand and show you everything you need, lead you every step of the way. Try to imagine it clearly. Ask them to do this in your heart. And see the result. See yourself attaining that goal. See yourself in the resultant state. Happily, joyously, vibrant. I bow down to that attainment. May we all realize our goals quickly in this life. Homage to all great beings everywhere. Thank you for coming. So tonight we are on to the second part of Proof of Future Lives. We have 2 more classes after this on karma. So when we spoke about logic, we said that we have a lot of blind spots in our mind and in our perception and our way of thinking and perceiving, and that we need logic to be able to see through those blind spots, right? That there are a lot of objects around us that we can't perceive. You know, it could be karma, the workings of karma, could be the ultimate nature of reality. Holy beings around us, beings of other realms and dimensions around us. We live with them, and we can't experience them, and we can't see them. So we said that initially with logic, we can penetrate to those things, we can understand those things, and we can perceive those things in a way, right? We said that a deductive perception, a logical deductive conclusion, is the same, has the same validity, is just as valid as a perception as a direct perception, right? A direct, overt perception. So we begin there, and as we meditate and as we develop our mental capacity, then we eventually reach a point where we can perceive these things directly, where we can perceive past lives and future lives directly, or where we can perceive other realms, or we can perceive ultimate reality, or where we can perceive the subtle workings of karma, right? But we have to start with logic because we don't have those capacities right now. So that's why we study reasoning, is to be able to figure things out, right? So tonight, we're going to try to drill through one of those obstacles and drill through one of those blockages, blockers, and that is seeing past and future lives, is trying to perceive the fact that we've had past and future lives through logic and deductive reasoning. Right? So you have to use logic to start to chip away at that block, and at some point in meditation you can see it directly. So this comes up in Pramanavartika in the logic texts, where there's a debate in ancient India. Basically someone is saying, look, if you spend long enough, if you spend enough time you can develop ultimate compassion. You can achieve a state where you have an ultimately evolved mind, where you can perfect your mind and become a perfect being, and no longer have a suffering human mind and human life, and that you can reach ultimate compassion and omniscience, right? So, and that every living person has that capacity, and every living person can attain and will attain that capacity. So, to reach the ultimate evolution of human mind, one needs ultimate compassion. And there are actually three different kinds of compassion, three types of compassion. The first is ninja. Please say ninja.
Ninja.
And this is just in Sanskrit, it's karuna. So ning means heart, and jay means lord or king. In Tibetan, Lord of Hearts is a synonym for compassion. In Sanskrit, it's karuna. So this is, what we experience around us in the world, if we're lucky, right? I mean, we meet people who are rather compassionate, where they think, there's people sleeping on the street and it's cold outside tonight. Give them some money so they can go in the subway, or give them some money so they can go in a shelter, or, someone's hungry, I'll give them some food. It's this sort of mundane, I hate to call it mundane, but it's the kind of compassion that we are most familiar with, right? It's a shame someone's suffering, right? I'm sorry to see that someone's suffering. I'm sorry to see that they're upset. I'm sorry to see that their mind is afflicted or unhappy, or whatever the case might be, right? So it's that attitude, that state of mind. So in the second level, please say tukje, chempo. So chempo means great compassion. In Sanskrit, it's mahakaruna. And so this is the wish that all other beings can be free of suffering, and that I can lead them there, that I can lead them to the end of suffering myself, right? Making the decision to bring that about myself. Now I'm going to put an end to all suffering everywhere, right? And it's a sense of, we're talking about it over pizza, I don't care if nobody helps me. Hector was saying, I'm sure it would be nice if somebody helps with the 3 jewels, right? And so I was just thinking, now, how does that relate to, great compassion? But then Hector said, well, no, but for me personally, I'm happy to do my own compassion completely by myself with no help from anyone else, right? And it's an interesting distinction, right? It's like if I'm working at being compassionate personally, right? I'm okay with that. But if I'm working at compassion, like on a project, or in a group, or a place, or an event, or a group goal, or something like that, that there's a sense of like everybody else should pitch in and everybody else should help, right? And it's an interesting question. It's an important thing to think about and look at. Is what am I willing to do on my own? What am I willing to do by myself, even if no one else helps, right? Because becoming enlightened is, ultimately, as you said, it's not about anyone else helping in one's personal efforts and in one's personal path. But then, what isn't personal? You could think in terms of, well, I'm a solitary practitioner, and so if it's just me one-on-one, it's one thing. But if it's me in a group, it's another thing. Right? Yeah. Good food for thought. But implicit in this great compassion is the sense of, it doesn't matter if anyone else helps, I'll do it myself. Irrespective of whether people obstruct me, criticize me, tell me I'm crazy, help or don't help. I'm just going to make sure it gets done, and I'm going to do it myself, and I'm going to become a Buddha, I'm going to become enlightened, so that I can end all suffering everywhere for everybody. Okay? And the third type of compassion is tukje chempo, which is holy great compassion. Tukje is an honorific. He would use it for like the Dalai Lama or the Buddha or something like that. It means mine. In a sort of a high honorific form, so it's the same. They're the same words, but It's used to describe the compassion of an enlightened being. It's a very high honorific form. So this describes the compassion that an enlightened being has, called holy great compassion. And it's the compassion in the mind stream of an enlightened being. And so these are three different stages describing where we are in the development of our compassion, right? Is it just walking down the street saying, it's too bad he's cold and maybe I'll do something, or maybe I'll just say, too bad he's cold and keep on walking, right? And then there's the commitment to get enlightened, to end all suffering for everyone, and there's the actualization of that, right? Having a mind which is functioning differently, right? And when one has that type of mind, then it's an automatic, spontaneous reflex that we help all other beings. You don't have to think about it. When one has this holy great compassion, it's the result of tremendous virtue, such that one doesn't even have to think the thought, oh, I want to help someone. It's just a natural reflex, and it's almost, you could say, a spontaneous arising, where without even thinking about it, one is emanating countless form bodies to help beings anywhere that there's a need or a potential. So, it's not so unusual to meet someone who's saying, well, let's try to help the hungry, or let's try to help the homeless, or something like that. We're fortunate we live in a society where people care about that. I mean, in some societies, in some cultures, they don't care about it. There isn't really an impulse to protect the weak and feed the hungry and those sorts of things. So we actually are fortunate to live in a culture and society where that matters, where people care about it. But then to meet a person who says, I want to end suffering of all living beings, right? I understand that if I become enlightened, I can emanate countless bodies, and I can help countless people on countless planets, right? The one in the middle, the great compassion, if you think about it, it's actually rather rare to meet someone like that, because first of all, you have to believe in enlightenment. You have to aspire to enlightenment, right? I mean, if somebody doesn't aspire to become enlightened, if somebody doesn't believe in enlightenment, they're certainly not going to spend their life working to bring every other living being to enlightenment, right?
What about Mother Teresa? Or like someone of another faith, they would qualify, right? Because enlightenment would just be like heaven or some sort of correlate.
But are they? I don't know what Mother Teresa's motivation is, but in an ordinary sense, if you can call it that, from what I understand, which isn't that much, Mother Teresa, Sisters of Charity, Sisters of the Poor, etc., work to alleviate the suffering of people in this life. Right? It's like, let's make sure people aren't dying in the streets of illness. Let's make sure they're not starving. Let's make sure they're not impoverished. Right? So I don't know what her motivation is, but is Mother Teresa working to get everybody to heaven? Is her goal to work such that every person she meets, goes to heaven, or whatever it might be. So using a correlate, it's still not the exact same thing. The idea of even a Christian approach that says, I want everybody to be baptized or repent or believe in God so that they can go to heaven. It's not really the same. It's not at all the same thing as to what we're talking about. And we're talking about wanting everyone to become fully enlightened, with the understanding that the only way that can happen is if they do it themselves by personal training, collecting the right personal karma to get that personal result, right? So it's very, very different to say, I have to become enlightened myself so that I can teach everyone else to end their own suffering, right? So how many people do we meet in life who believe in enlightenment and then aspire to nirvana or enlightenment, and then they're willing to basically spend every hour of every day, every moment of every hour of every day working to help others. We're here in a Dharma class, right? And relative minority in the population. And so from a motivational perspective, I'd say we all have very high motivations, right? To be good people and to be bodhisattvas and to do the right thing, to be virtuous and the rest. And then even in this small group, which is a very small fraction of the population, how many of us are working every moment of every hour of every day, trying to help others and trying to help alleviate the suffering of others and trying to become enlightened ourselves, right? So, to meet another person who's thinking, I understand that if I can become enlightened, I can emanate countless form bodies, to go to countless realms and help countless beings. It's extremely rare, right? Very rare to find somebody who's thinking like that. I mean, somebody who's thinking like that, first of all, and then someone who's actually doing it is even rarer, right? So, that's one of the reasons why I feel so fortunate that Holy Geshe Michael is here teaching, because in my experience in my life, he's one of the few people that I've ever met whose activities are pretty much full-on devoted to teaching and spreading the ideas of virtue and karma and emptiness and helping as many people as possible understand these holy concepts so that they can eliminate their ignorance and have a basis to come to the end of suffering. So a very rare thing to meet somebody who thinks like that, and especially somebody who's spending every single waking moment of the day trying to get people enlightened. So even if not much sunk in during his teachings, or it didn't resonate, or whatever the case might be, still a great blessing to have that, to know a person like that, to have a person like that in our world or in our lives. So like that, right? So how long does it take to go through these stages of compassion? Master Dharmakirti has been trying to prove that it's possible for every single mind stream to become enlightened. Master Dharmakirti is trying to prove that every single mind stream in existence will become enlightened, right? And then, the question is, well, how does that happen? How does one do that? And you have to go through these 3 stages of compassion. You have to first at least care that somebody's sick or cold or hungry, right? I mean, if you don't care if they're sick and cold or hungry, you're certainly not going to aspire to end all of their suffering. I mean, if their crude, overt sufferings are not moving you, then how could you go on to care more about them, And to think like, well, I'm sorry that they felt a little lonely today, or I'm sorry that, that they don't have, happiness in their mind, or that they have an imbalanced mind, or whatever it is. If we don't care that they have sores all over their body, or that they could get frostbite tonight, why are we going to care that they're, a little unhappy about some other thing? It just doesn't make any sense. So anyway, so you got to start with that. You got to start with the basic compassion, right? And hopefully one then moves on to feeling great compassion, the sense of, I want to end all of this person's suffering on every level, and not just this person, but every person. And I want to end every suffering of every person on every level, right? So to develop that, to go through those stages in one lifetime would be extraordinary, right? I mean, I know in my case, when I grew up in a standard Darwinian household which said every man for themselves. Those who are smartest get ahead, and those who are dumbest fall behind. And those who have more capacity get more, and those who have less capacity get less. And that's just the nature of life, and that's how the world is. And just go do it. Don't worry about other people. You don't need to care about other people. You just go apply yourself and go do your best and rise to your level and enjoy your life, and that's that, right? So, I mean, even to just kind of come out of a normal Darwinian Western culture, if you will, from that mindset and from that paradigm to a paradigm that even says I should even think about or care about other people is a big first step. It's not what our culture necessarily advocates. Anyway, so Master Shantideva is saying that we have to go through all 3 of these levels to become enlightened, and it takes more than one lifetime to do it. It takes multiple lifetimes to do this, right? And so he's talking about multiple lifetimes. In the Vinaya Sutras, they talk about how long it took Lord Buddha, and millions upon millions of years and eons, etc. So in Master Shantideva's day, he's saying basically anyone can do it if you practice, and you have to practice consistently, and you have to develop these stages to become enlightened. So you have to decide to get enlightened, and you have to work on it your entire lifetime. So this is where future lives come in. Master Dharmakirti bumps into some non-Buddhists in ancient India, right? And he's talking about developing compassion, the need to develop compassion. I mean, he's basically talking about how everyone can become a Buddha, how everyone can become enlightened. And to become enlightened, you have to develop great compassion. And it's not easy. It takes a long time. It takes more than one lifetime, right? It's not just, you wake up and one day you say, I love everybody, I care about everybody, I'm going to spend every waking moment, thinking about everybody else and not thinking about myself, and I'm just going to walk around the street, putting all my life energy into caring for anyone and not worrying so much about myself. I mean, it's not how we live. Right? So, and it wasn't how they lived then either, And so Master Dharmakirti is, he's saying like, you got to do this, and it takes lifetimes to do it. And then these non-Buddhists bump into him and they say, you're crazy. What are you talking about? And they're saying it's not possible to become enlightened. You can't develop this kind of compassion. It's impossible to develop this kind of compassion. You can't do it in this life. Nobody could develop this kind of great compassion in their life. And Master Dharmakirti says, yeah, you can't do it in one life. It takes multiple lifetimes. It takes many lifetimes of practice and effort to cultivate this. And so, so they say, you're crazy, right? And these are the Shravakas. And so they say, it's impossible. There are no future lives, therefore there are no Buddhas, there are no enlightened beings. So just, stop talking crazy talk, whatever. So then they get into the debate, and they get into the argument, and the Shravakas gave 3 arguments against future lives. They present 3 different positions, 3 different rationales why it's impossible that future lives exist. Okay, and Master Dharmakirti's position is no. After the body dies, the mind goes on, and that's kind of his big thing is that the mind goes on after the body dies. Okay, and so he says, why do you think that when the body dies, the mind stops, right? and they give the 3 reasons. Their first argument is that the mind is a physical thing. You cut somebody's head open, or somebody's head smashes open, and there's gray matter in there, which is a brain, and that's the mind. You don't have a brain, you don't have a mind. Okay, that's all. This is a physical. We have a physical existence. We are physical organisms, and we are biological organisms. And as long as the biological organism is functioning, no problem. Then you have a mind. But when the biological organism stops functioning, and the mind, because it's just a biological thing. It's just physical matter. It's just a physical thing which is functioning like your fingers move. Your fingers move, and that's your fingers. And you've got gray matter up here, and it does what it does, and you've got a mind. So when when stuff stops moving around, there is nothing else. End of story. Right? So that's their first position, is that the physical stuff is the mind. The brain is the mind. Right? Sound familiar? It's like Shravakas, they're like early Westerners, right? Early Western culture, perhaps. I don't know. So that's their first argument. When the body dies, the mind can't go on because the mind is part of the body.
But I think there's a lot of Shravakas now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Wait to hear the other 2 arguments, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they say you can't get ultimate compassion, and there's no such thing as Buddhahood, because the mind is just the brain. And the brain isn't going anywhere once its body stops functioning. It's just a lump of stuff, and it's sitting there, and it's not going anywhere. Okay, end of story. So, first argument. And they use the example of, they give an example of the mind is like beer and its ability to get you drunk. They're talking about the mind and the body, and the relationship of the mind and the body. Because when we, if we talk about what am I, right? What constitutes me as a person? I have a body and a mind. I mean, that's typically how we think of ourselves, right? I have a mind, I have a body. And so they say, well, look, your mind and your body, it's like beer and the ability to get you drunk, okay? One goes with the other. If you have beer, you're going to get a buzz. Or they say it's like, red and apples, You can't, I'm talking about red apples. They say you can't have an apple without having red. Red is part of the apple. They go together, all right? If you got an apple, you got red. We're talking about red apples. So you can't take away
the beer without taking away the ability to get drunk. You know, you can't take away, you know, the apple without taking away the red. I don't know, whatever it is, the red, yeah, but you take one away, the other goes away too. That's their point. Right? One doesn't exist without the other. So, so that's their first argument. Their second argument is that the mind is dependent upon the body. And this is a view that we similarly hold, right? Okay, well, maybe the mind isn't the brain. It's not the tissue of the brain, right? But it depends on it. Okay, so maybe we have like trillions of, you know, synapses of nerves up there in the noggin, right? And you know, there's electrical activity and all these little firings going on, and somehow as a result of that, there's thought, and that's our mind, right? So the second argument that they present is that the mind is based upon the body or the brain, okay? The physical stuff, right? Like you hang a picture on the wall, it's dependent upon it. Like a wall holds up a photograph, right? So they say, look, you know, even if we agree that the mind is separate from the physical stuff, even if we say, okay, the gray matter of the brain does not equal the mind, is not synonymous with the mind, it's not identical to the mind. They say, let's just say we grant you that there is the gray matter and the neurons and all that. But that stuff gives rise to the mind. That is the source of the mind and the basis of the mind and the thing which brings the mind about. And it supports the mind, right? Just like you couldn't hang a picture on a wall without a wall. Right? And I mean, that's what we think. I mean, we think like, okay, I've got trillions of neurons firing, and somehow all these electrical impulses are giving rise to my thoughts, and my consciousness, and my mind. Yeah.
So are they defining mind as thought?
The Shravakas?
Right, so what's the definition of mind here?
Well,
because presumably they'd have to agree on a definition to even have this debate.
well, what they're saying is, if you take a step back, what is their position? Their position is you don't go on, right? You die and you're done.
Okay.
There are no future lives. So when we talk about future lives, there has to be something which continues. There has to be a you which continues from life to life, right? And so what is that thing? What is that you that continues from life to life, right? I mean, in a Christian sense, you know, you got your soul or your spirit or some crystalline thing that floats off to your next life or to heaven or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. So in Buddhism, we don't have this concept of some like little crystal spirit hiding somewhere which then reunites with God or goes to heaven or whatever that idea is. Or, you know, this part of God that's split off from God that goes back to God. I mean, I don't know, you know? So the Shravakas are just saying one life to live, essentially. There are no future lives. I mean, it's like, I guess you would call them perhaps equivalent to the nihilist, however you say that, right? I mean, this is it. There's no future life. You got this life. That's all there is. You're dead and you're done. Mm-hmm. Why would you possibly think that there's anything after this? They're saying, you're crazy, Master Dharmakirti. You Buddhists are nuts. Clearly, this life is all there is. Why in the world would you possibly think that there's anything after this life? Okay. Right? And so then, Master Dharmakirti is addressing it to say, why do you say that? Right? And they say, because you fall over and you don't move and you're done. And it's obvious. You could poke a person, you could talk to them, you could smack them a little bit. They're not there. They're not talking to you. They're not interacting with you. They're not going to get up like 2 days later and start walking around and talking again. Right? They're dead. There's nothing else. So that's where they're coming from. See what I mean?
So they don't define. Yeah, I see how it would take place, but I'm also thinking of, like, for example, if like you engage with, I mean, you know, my profession is in psychology, so I feel like I'm constantly engaging with people who have this. It's a little bit more sophisticated of an argument, right? Because then you talk about neurons. So my question is, like, is there an operational definition in this debate of what mind is? Is it consciousness? Is it the ability to string thoughts together? Is it a consistent personality? Or-
Yeah. I mean, certainly from a Buddhist perspective, there's an extensive definition of mind and what mind and mental functions are. But it doesn't really come up in this debate, simply because, I mean, you know, from a Buddhist perspective, you have what's called main mind or main awareness, which is described as aware and knowing, right? And it is the main mind which holds all of the other mental functions, which are things like discrimination and all the other mental processes.
Feeling.
Yeah. 46 or 48 categories of
51, 54,
you know,
46.
depending upon which school you're in, you know, as to how the mind is subdivided and described. But from the perspective of this debate, it's really just a question of, is there anything which goes on? Because they're saying there ain't nothing that goes on, right? And so Master Dhammakirti is saying, of course there's something that goes on, your mind goes on. And so then, you know, then we get into, why do you say that? And what is it that goes on? And how does it go on? And how do you talk about it? And how do you describe it? And all those sorts of things, right? So we're going to go into how that's described and how that's framed in this context. Right? Okay. So, all right. So you know, they say, look, if you take away the body, if you take away the brain, then the mind is going to disappear. Okay, the mind is just going to die also, and they depend on each other. So the mind rests upon the body, the mind rests upon the brain, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that's the second argument. The third argument is look, even if it's not the case, even if the mind doesn't arise from the firing. I mean, I'm saying this; they didn't say this because they didn't talk about the firing of the neurons in ancient India, but get the feel of it. You know, even if the mind doesn't arise from the firing of neurons of the physical stuff of, you know, the synapses and the, you know, the electricity and the rest, right? Then they're saying that the mind at least grows from the body. You know, you start with some cells, the cells start to grow, right? I mean, there's nothing there in the beginning, right? Parents come together, you have conception, you get some cells that start to subdivide, you know, you got an embryo, the embryo develops, at some point you get a brain stem, you know, somewhere along the way you have a more developed brain, and sooner or later the mind develops as an extension of that, right? Okay? And the mind starts to function, okay? And that if you take away the cause, which is the body, then the mind will stop functioning, okay? The body is the cause of the mind. And if you take away the cause of the mind, then the mind stops functioning. And they use the example of the body and the mind being like a lamp and the light that comes from the lamp. So the body would be analogous to the lamp, which is resulting in the light, which is the source of the light. Okay. So those are their three arguments for why the mind does not go on after you die, why nothing goes on after you die, right? So, and they're saying, look, take any one of these scenarios, and when you take away the body, the mind can't survive. Okay. So the first one is saying that the mind is the brain or some physical part of the brain. The second one is saying the mind is sort of generated by your body or floating on your body, and when the body collapses, then the mind dies also. And the third one's saying that when the body reaches a certain point of development, then you can start having a mind, and a mind results. And when the body's development stops and dies, then the mind also stops. Okay. And I mean, this is basically the Western viewpoint. I mean, I think we've pretty thoroughly covered all the Western viewpoints of the mind. Right? And I think in my case, the second one is probably the one I most relate to, which is like, well, yeah, there's trillions of neurons and electrical impulses, and somehow all the electricity, you know, creates awareness and thoughts and impulses and the rest, right? So that's what they say. They say to Master Dhammakirti, you know, how do you know that the mind goes on? Like, we've just given you 3 good reasons why the mind does not go on. And they say, how do you know, Master Dhammakirti, that the mind goes on? You know? I mean, tell us why the mind goes on. Why would you possibly think that the mind goes on? Right? I mean, they say, look, somebody dies, their body's lying there, and it's done. It's very clear, right? But does that prove that the mind is gone? right? Does the fact that the body is lying there not moving and will not ever function again prove that the mind is dead?
Unless they get resurrected.
Well, that happens in very special cases from what I've heard.
Or like near-death experiences, right?
Yeah, they don't talk about that so much in ancient India.
Right.
It wasn't one of Master Dharmakirti's arguments. He's a logician, mind you. So he's using purely rational arguments rather than a buddy of mine came back from the dead, which wouldn't fall in the rubric of logical presentation, right? So, I mean, there are no arguments that a Westerner can give to prove that the mind dies. And there were no arguments that the Shamakas could give that the mind actually dies, that hold water, you know? There's nothing that proves that the mind is synonymous with the body, that the mind is tied to the body, that the mind is generated by the body, right? These are the Shravaka's arguments. And so there is no proof that any of those things are true. No one has ever shown any of those things to be the case, right? Those are assumptions. Those are cultural suppositions, you could say, right? So, I mean, it's like talking about a truck or a car and the driver, you know? The car's driving down the road and the car breaks down. And so someone would say, well, the car's not moving, the car can't drive anymore, and therefore the driver must be dead. I mean, it's the exact same statement that's being made about the body and the mind. You know, to say there's no movement from the car, therefore it's proof that the driver is dead, makes no sense whatsoever.
You can perceive drivers that are carless, but you can't necessarily perceive
Cars that are driverless?
Drivers that are carless. Because in your analogy, the mind is the thing which is represented by the driver. So when one car dies, I can see the person get out and walk to the subway.
Sure, but we're using logic. We're not talking about can you look through the windshield and see that there's a person in there.
Right, but I think that doesn't hold weight. Like if I was to tell this to someone who wasn't a Buddhist,
yeah.
Right, you can't see the mind float up and get confused and whatever. I mean, you can't perceive it, and I think that's the main.
So if I said to you, there's a vehicle which was moving, right, and there was something which was driving the vehicle and making the vehicle move, right? And the vehicle broke down and stopped working and won't work anymore.
And the windows were tinted.
Well, you're not even there. You're not around the car, so we're just talking.
You're imagining a car.
Yeah. So if I said to you that the vehicle used to run,
right,
and it broke down and it doesn't run anymore, okay,
yes.
And therefore the thing that was the driver is also broken down and done and won't work anymore. Does that logically make sense from what you know about cars and drivers?
No, but that's based on the presupposition that those are two separate things that can exist independently. So from the other person's perspective, they're dependent, so you can't separate them.
But that's exactly the point. It's precisely the point. The point is that there is a presupposition that there is a dependency or an independency between the car and the driver and the mind and the body. That's exactly the parallel that they're making. So their point is look, for some reason, people have this presupposition that there is an unseverable connection between the mind and the body, or that the mind and the body are the same thing, when in fact they're two different things, which are functioning together, just like a car and a driver are two separate things, which are functioning together, right? A car is not going to move without a driver. Right? A body is not going to move without a mind. That's exactly what they're saying. And they're saying that no difference, other than the assumption that a car and a driver have a different status than a body and a mind. Why do we presume that the relationship between a body and a mind is different than the relationship between a car and a driver?
Because the mind is intangible.
Well, we're drawing the parallel in a more crude fashion.
Yeah.
Right? But the parallel still stands. And you can say a physical thing and a physical thing versus a physical thing and a mental thing. But the point, you have to catch the point. The point is the connection between the two. Right?
Yeah, I understand, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
like, from
You're saying it's not a perfect metaphor.
right, it's not. I mean, it's not proving anything to me that I didn't already believe before I came here. So.
Well, it's not meant to be a proof. It's meant to suggest that our normal reasoning is faulty. Right? So he's simply giving an example that says the way you think about the body and the mind is flawed. The way you think about the relationship between the body and the mind is illogical. We conclude a priori, is that how you say it? That those two are inseparable, that they're the same thing, when in fact they're not. There's no proof that they're the same thing. There's no proof that they live and die together, that they're born and die together, right? Simultaneously, at the same point in time together. Okay? So, we've been inculcated to think like that, and our culture has taught us to think that way, and so we believe it, but there's no proof of it, you know? There's absolutely no proof that the body comes into being when, there's absolutely no proof that the mind comes into being when a baby is born or is conceived. And there's absolutely no proof that the mind stops or goes out of being when the physical body dies, right? So we have a cultural belief system which is not based upon anything other than assumption, right? And so we're living our lives and we're making very important decisions based on unfounded assumptions, right? And so because there's no proof that the mind does not go on, and Buddhists assert that the mind does go on, and that the body and mind are separate things, then Master Dharmakirti does his thing to talk about why these assumptions are illogical and why these assumptions don't stand up to analysis or examination, right? And so there's this as a logician, one would say, if you cannot disprove something, then you need to at least entertain that it's possible, right? So no one has ever proven that the mind stops when the body stops. Never been proven, ever, right? Therefore, one must, if one is to truly be objective and logical, one must at least entertain the idea that it's possible that the mind does not stop when the body stops. Okay, so that's a starting point, right? That's a sort of a reaching a neutral ground, if you will, right? And Master Dharmakirti is trying to bring this to a neutral ground and say, look, folks, here are the flaws in your arguments, and let's just reach a neutral ground and let's look at it with fresh perspective. Okay? So we have to talk about causation. We have to talk about the nature of the mind and where the mind comes from and why the mind is different than the body. I mean, Buddhists are asserting, Master Dharmakirti is asserting, that the mind is not related to the body. Okay, well, you say that, prove it. You say you're a logician, you're telling me that the mind is a separate thing from the body. Prove it, right? So he gives several arguments. And to go into that, we have to understand the idea of a material cause. So it's called a nirlingikyu, the thing which turns into the result. Like if you plant an acorn, that's the thing that turns into the oak tree, right? So the acorn is the material cause which turns into the oak tree. It is the thing that flops over into the oak tree, right? So you wouldn't plant, you wouldn't put some water in the ground and think it's going to turn into an oak tree, right? It's not a material cause. I mean, the water is a secondary factor, okay? The material cause is the acorn. You have to have secondary factors there too, like water and air and sunlight. But the water is not the material cause that flops over into the oak tree. The acorn is the thing which disappears and turns into the oak tree, right? through the process of turning into the oak tree, the material cause disappears. Right? It becomes the result. The material cause becomes the result. Right? So this is the idea of a material cause. Okay. So in the case of a pot, it's a lump of clay. The lump of clay is the material cause. It's the thing that turns into a pot. Okay. So when we talk about the mind, so then what is the material cause of the mind? What is the stuff that turns into the mind? All right. What is it that flops over and turns into the mind? Okay. So from a Buddhist perspective, the consciousness that you had an hour ago or a minute ago is the consciousness flops over into this moment of consciousness. Okay. Each moment of consciousness is the material cause for the next moment of consciousness. Right. Okay. So Buddhists would say that the mind is completely different than your physical stuff. Our physiology, the cells of our body, our bones, our nerves, our muscles, our tissue, all of these things have a certain nature and composition. It's dense, it's hard, it's coarse, it's tangible. It has boundaries, right? It has mass, various features. The mind doesn't have any of those qualities or any of those features, not similar at all. The mind is not bounded. The mind does not have mass. The mind does not have coarse materiality, physicality, right? It has awareness beyond any of the physical boundaries or limitations. It has the ability to recall, to know things logically. It's ineffable. It can't be cut. It can't be divided. It can't be hurt. So the mind is different stuff than the body, right? It's invisible and beyond the limits of the body, and sort of, you could say, almost crystalline awareness, right? So from a Buddhist perspective, we say the mind has no beginning, right? If there is a current moment of mind, there must have been a previous moment of mind. And it's impossible to have this moment of mind without having had a prior moment of mind, which led to this moment of mind. There had to be a prior moment of mind that flopped over into this moment of mind. Right? Okay. So then we go into, all right, I understand that the mind is very different stuff than the body. Therefore, it seems unlikely or improbable that a substantially different stuff was the material cause of the mind, right? Like we say, the acorn turns into the tree, the clay turns into the pot. How can something which is completely different turn into a result? So, we're faced with that dilemma, right? So then we delve further into why that doesn't work, why it doesn't make sense, and why it's not logical that physical matter is the cause of the mind, right? So we say there has to be a similarity or continuity between cause and effect, right? If we look at our physical body, all of our physical senses, our tactile sensation, our skin, our nerves, our eyes, our ears, all of our senses, right? All of our physicality is involved in sense powers, right? Like this organism is geared towards sensing. I hear things, I smell things, I taste things, I touch things, right? So, does the mind do this? Does the mind have tactile sense? Does the mind smell? No, it doesn't have any of those capacities. The mind doesn't possess any similar quality, any of the similar attributes of the body, right? There's no similarity whatsoever. There's no cause-effect relationship.
So
Okay?
perception is different from consciousness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because think about how things work. You take in information through your eyeball, so you make the distinction between your eyeball,
Right.
the organ, which is taking in information,
Yeah.
right, and the perception of that information.
You
There's-
can still, but But even if your sense organs are damaged, you can still have you can still have sensory perceptions.
Well, if you lose your eyes, can you see?
You can still have a perception that you're seeing something, yes.
A mental perception.
What's the difference?
Well,
It happens in your
one
brain.
involves. Well, see, this is where it comes down to it, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So
I'm sorry. I'm
is
doing this
is
to
there
you.
a difference? And we have to go through it systematically.
Okay.
Because we're logicians now tonight. All right. So, from a Buddhist perspective, and this you have to do the whole course, the whole Proof of Future Lives course. But so basically, from a perceptual sense, you have a sense organ, right, which leads to a sense consciousness. All right. So there is a visual consciousness, which is associated with the eye organ. Okay. So the eye organ, the rods and cones, detect photons of light or whatever they do, right? Translate it to whatever.
Right.
Okay. And then there is a visual consciousness which is aware of that.
Mhm.
Okay. And then the mind does something with it.
Right, I mean, that's the general way that it works, but you can stimulate certain areas of the brain, and someone will have a perception that they will experience a sense perception.
Mhm.
For example, also with phantom limbs,
Mhm.
right? If you stimulate a certain part of someone's brain, they can still have that.
Yeah. So is there a difference between a sense perception and the mind?
Well, you're saying no, but I would say yes. And
Well,
I would
let us
also
finish-
say that thoughts are like
Yeah.
perception, like emotions are like perceptions too.
The,
Well, again, you have to, physical perceptions versus mental concepts and mental constructs. They're not the same thing.
because just in your argument there, the phantom limb,
Yeah.
I can have the sense perception that I have a limb, but my mental consciousness confirms I have none. I know I'm lying, even if you've stimulated it, just to differentiate the mental and the sense, the one stimulated by the brain activity.
But we have to stick with logical lines of reasoning. We're going off in different
Sorry.
directions which aren't. No, I mean, it's a good debate, and it's great to talk about it, but if we're going to be logical, then we have to follow a line of reasoning through to the end, and keep clear boundaries about what the line of reasoning is about. So this line of reasoning is about physical stuff, okay? All right? We're saying that the nature of the body is that it's physical stuff, it's physical organs, okay? And those physical organs perform a physiological function, okay? All right? And there's no similarity between the physiological functions of all the organs of this physical body and what the mind does. There is no cause-effect relationship there. The eyeballs see, right? The mind, okay, does not see like an eyeball sees. It's a separate thing that functions in a different way, right? Now, does the mind conceive of things? Obviously. Does the mind conceptualize things? Obviously, right? But is it perceiving directly itself with an eyeball? No. The mind is not an eyeball and does not have an eyeball, right? So the point here is that living physical matter serves a different function from the mind. Okay, it's different stuff. Okay, it's a different materiality. All right, and so so they make the point that your present awareness is not the result of this physical tissue and matter. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but doesn't it go too far to say that there's no relationship between the gross physical stuff and...
I didn't say there was no relationship. I said it was not the material cause.
Well, if it's not the material cause, then if you tap my hand 3 times, why does my mind count 3? Not 2 and not 4.
Does tapping your hand 3 times cause your mind? Because that's what we're talking about.
Well,
We're not talking about does your mind register your senses. I mean, obviously, no Buddhist or anyone else is going to deny the fact that the mind is aware and knowing and sentient of all the sensory inputs, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what is the material cause of the mind.
Well, if the data,
Yeah.
the three tabs,
Yeah.
has common ground with the mind to the extent that, okay, the mind will conceive of three after the physical form has been tapped 3 times,
Mhm.
then one could say that information
Yeah.
is a subsuming state of both the physical and the mental.
But can one say that that caused the mind to come into existence?
What would the mind be doing otherwise? I mean, without external stimuli. That's kind of where I'm getting tripped up here.
Yeah, you have to, we're not talking about what is the content of the mind. We're not talking about is the mind registering and processing the sensory inputs.
They're saying,
We're
where's the
talking
mind
about
come
what
from?
brings the very mind into existence.
Right, and
So
I would
we-
kind of go with what Bruce is saying.
Are we saying that the mind is not only not the body, but it's conceptual content? It's also not that.
We're saying that the conception, how would I say this? I think you have to say it a little differently because we're talking about what causes the mind, what is the material cause of the mind, okay? So we're not talking about, when you say what is the mind, we're not talking about what is the mind because you could talk about 60 different things that the mind is. We're talking about what is the material cause of the existence of the mind, okay?
But now you're kind of backing into mind as pure abstraction.
In what sense?
Well, because if it's not its physicality and if it's not its content, okay, then without quite saying so, the thing that you're really asking for mind to be is an undifferentiated something.
No, I mean we have to use language and we have to say what the mind is, right? Right? So I mean, and see, this is where it gets to be a little slippery. We have to stay in the school we're in. We're in a certain school here, right? Because if you go into the Madhyamika Prasangika school, it's very different. The Madhyamika Prasangika school, they would say that the projection of the mind is the mind. And the projection and the idea of the mind continuing from moment to moment is the streaming of the mind. But we're not going there because that's a whole other story, okay? We're just talking about this in this school with this logic. All right? So in this school with this logic, when we're saying everything has a material cause, okay? Yeah, the mind's got, 50 components, 60 components, all sorts of content, all sorts of means of thinking and discerning and reasoning, but it's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about, does the mind exist? And if so, what's its material cause? What is the primary cause that brings the mind into existence? That's all. Is this physical organism the thing that brings the mind into existence? And then, they're saying no. Because if you look at how this physical organism works, you hear sounds through your ears, you feel things through your skin, you smell things through your nose, you taste things through your tongue. Your mind doesn't have a tongue. Your mind doesn't taste of its own accord over here. Just let's pretend there's a mind sitting over there by itself, okay?
Got out of the car.
Can it taste? Doesn't have a tongue. Can it smell? Doesn't have a nose, okay? Very different stuff, all right? So they're saying, look, this physical stuff, completely different stuff than a mind. So to say that a tongue or a nose or nerve endings or whatever you want to pull out from the physical body is the material cause of the mind doesn't make any sense. It's just materially different stuff. No real relationship between the two. Like water turning into an oak tree. No relationship. So we have to think about it. Okay? So there's no continuity between cause and effect. Living physical matter, right, doesn't do the same stuff that the mind does. Right? Okay, so what about outside physical matter? I mean, what about chemicals? If this, we're talking about where does the mind come from? What is the material cause of the mind, right? If it's not generated or coming from the organism, the biological organism, right? What about just stuff outside of my body? What about, I don't know, a little bit of sulfur, a little bit of oxygen, a little bit of nitrogen, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We talked about the periodic table of the elements the other day, right? Just combine it all in just the right order and consciousness arises, right? Why doesn't the mind just come from outside physical matter? Well, because it hasn't happened yet. I mean, take your periodic table of elements, combine it in any combination you want, and does sentience and awareness and mind arise? Does a thinking being pop up and start doing whatever it does? It's never happened, never been confirmed, never been observed. So it's not confirmable. It just doesn't work. All right. So that's pretty straightforward, right? All right. And so then the next question becomes, well, the Shravaka say, okay, well, we understand about the living tissue thing, living tissue being so different from the mind and functioning differently, not being material cause. The mind's uncuttable, unweighable, ineffable, crystalline, knowing, totally different from living tissue, right? So I get that. I also get your argument about sulfur and molybdenum and whatever else not being combined to produce consciousness. Yeah.
Quick question. The thing you just said about the sulfur and all that stuff coming together, can you make the argument that a sperm and an egg are two physicalities coming together that create consciousness?
Well, that would be kind of going back. That would be going back to the Shravaka argument, right? I mean, that's their argument number 3. You get a sperm and an egg, cells divide, and at a certain point, the cells have divided enough and formed a complex enough biological organism that a mind sprouts up and starts functioning. I mean, so that is one of the Shravaka arguments. Okay? And so, the point that we just made was while that's a supporting condition, it's not a material cause. Okay. Buddhism certainly says there is a relationship between this body and this mind, clearly. I mean, when I say, what am I? I'm a body and mind. Clearly, Buddhism is saying there's a relationship between the body and mind. However, Buddhism is saying the mind does not come into existence and the mind does not go out of existence with this body. This body is not the material cause which brings the mind into existence and is correlated to its going out of existence. You see?
And for that argument, you can also use, I guess, the fact that, like, if you were to take away a certain sense of the body, it doesn't negate the mind existing.
Yeah, oh, you're getting ahead of us, though. But yes, exactly right. That's the next argument. You're exactly right. So.
Yeah,
I was looking forward to that argument. Thanks.
Now you blew it. See, darn it. Oh my.
Spoiler alert.
So, okay, so I'll go there. Since you brought it up, I'm going to jump over there and go there. Because, it's sort of, it's anticlimactic now. We're just going to cover it.
Segue.
You're welcome.
So, all physical matter is involved with one of the senses, right? All living physical matter, right? So, if your senses were the cause of your mind, right? I mean, you take this body and you could say, all of my senses together are the cause of my mind, right? I mean, I've got to have all 5 senses for a mind to arise. Then you would say, okay, well, and I have to have all my organs, right, for a mind to arise. And you would say, well, if somebody were blind, would their mind disappear? Right? If the mind was resident or connected to or caused by, so let's stick with material cause. If any one of our senses was the material cause of the mind, right? Let's say my vision was the material cause of a mind. Blind people wouldn't have a mind, right? Or if the combination of the 5 senses were the material cause of having a mind, then if you lost any one of those, you still wouldn't have a mind, because you don't have all 5 senses, you've only got 4. And you need all 5 to have a mind as a material cause for a mind, right? So the senses, any one of the senses or any combination of the senses are not the material cause of the mind, okay? So then the other argument is if the mind were materially caused by the senses, it should have the same quality of those senses. It should be similar in nature to those senses. So if vision, the sense of vision, were the material cause of the mind should be able to perceive visually as similarly to the eyeball or to the physical sight, right? So, like the acorn is similar to the oak tree. If the mind were caused by the eye sense, the eye sensory capacity, then the mind should have a similar capacity or nature as seeing with their eyeball, and it doesn't. Okay? One would have to be able to see with one's memory, for example, as clearly as they do with their eyeballs, right? And it doesn't work that way, right? Okay? Something like that. So then they're on to, we've said, for the Buddhist logical refutation is look, you're saying the mind is tied to the physical stuff. You Shravakas, you Westerners are saying the mind is tied to the physical stuff. It sees the physical stuff of this body as the physical stuff outside of this body. All right? And we've been pretty clear in saying there's nothing about this physical body that remotely resembles a mind to be a material cause for a mind, for the reasons mentioned. And there's nothing outside this physical body that you're going to put together that's going to cause the mind to pop up. So, the material cause of the mind is certainly not physical stuff. Okay? So then the Shravakas make the next argument, and they say, look, so perhaps it wasn't something physical that turned into your mind, right? Let's say when the male and the female got together and they conceived the child, that it wasn't just about the sperm and the egg coming together. There was some kind of other thing going on where part of the man's mind and part of the woman's mind combined, like at conception, along with the physical stuff, and gave rise to a new mind, right? So like bits of their mind were the source of the child's mind, right? So that's their next position, right? that the parents' minds create a new mind, right? So then Master Dhammakirti says, well, think about it, right? We're talking about a material cause, so that means there has to be a similarity between the cause and the result. Okay? So, can you have a genius with a stupid child? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you have twins that are completely opposite in disposition? Can you have? I got two kids that are like night and day in terms of their disposition and their behavior, right? So he just says, look, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. If you're telling me that part of the father's mind and part of the mother's mind like somehow become the child's mind, then there has to be materiality, a material similarity. There has to be some resemblance between the cause and the result. And you can have children which bear no resemblance whatsoever to their parents and their mind and disposition and emotions and behavior. So it doesn't make any sense that it would be that, because there is no consistent similarity. There is no consistent causation going on there. So so that one goes by the wayside, right? You can have somebody who's a brilliant musician with kids which are musically inept, on and on and on and on. So that one isn't logical either. Okay. All right. So I think it's a good place to take a break. So that's basically the guts of proving that. That's the guts of showing that there is no proof. How to say this? That's the guts of showing that the mind is not tied to the body and implicitly related to the body, right? And is not of the same stuff as the body. And to say it makes no sense whatsoever to draw some linkage between the body and the mind in a way where we say the body causes the mind. Okay? So they've basically thoroughly disproven that the body causes or is the basis of the mind. Which then leaves you with the question of, what is the cause of the mind? What is the basis of the mind? And that's, as we said, the mind of the moment before. From a Buddhist perspective, the mind stream has always, the mind has always existed, and it streams from moment to moment, one moment of mind flopping into the next moment of mind. And the only thing that logically makes any sense is that mind was caused by mind. Yes.
Well, speaking of consistency as a test of validity, if that conclusion were true, then whatever thought I had in a previous moment of mind would have to be the same thought I had in a successive moment of mind.
If the thought from a moment before were the cause of the thought in the next moment.
So the previous moment will cause the mind itself.
The previous moment of thought, or
previous moment of mind,
okay,
will cause a successor state of mind, not the content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you saying that an oak with an acorn must always be an acorn?
According to the logic of this argument, yes.
Yeah, mine was caused by
It's
mind.
An acorn can only.
No, he's saying it's of a similar type. He's not saying it's exactly the same.
But he's also not saying that thoughts are mind.
Right, but we never defined mind this whole time. So
I know,
it's kind
because
of-
that wasn't the argument.
Well, actually, that raises another problem, which is if we want to say that thought is to be distinguished from the mind that thinks it, and mind is discrete unto itself, then it can't.
Well, I'm not sure about what discrete unto itself
But
element.
it's something that it ain't its contents. It's just, it is what it is, whatever that may be.
So if we talk
however we
about,
define it.
but you have to talk about main mind, right? So main mind, which is aware and knowing, and is where the content occurs.
Okay.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say is, if by these terms, if we want to say that mind is mind in itself, then how can it have a thought?
You have to say it again. If mind is
How can
mind,
mind have a thought? If it is possible that mind is unto itself a thing definitively to be established as mind as opposed to its
oh, as a self-existent thing, you mean?
I have an analogy.
then how can it have a thought?
If it were a self-existent
It would
thing?
cease to be purely mind
Sure.
once it had a thought
Sure.
any
No,
thought.
it's like a basket always being a basket, but it holds different things. I think that's the type of, so the mind is in a constant state of mindness, and one quality of that state is that it can contain perceptions and thoughts.
Can you take the contents of the basket and separate them from the basket and still have them be what they are? Yes, but you can't take the thought out of the mind and have it exist independently.
Well, that's arguing whether or not things are self-existent.
So I would ask you,
You can be
if you,
unconscious.
so I would ask you if you, let's take the basket and contents example, because I think that's a very good one. It's very, very useful.
I
Thank you.
thought of
Did
that.
something good.
Thank you. I totally.
That's my idea, my So let's take that because it's very useful. So you have all the contents of the basket, the contents of the mind, all the thoughts of the mind, right? Is the mind anything other than that? It's an idea, it's a construct, it's a concept, right? And so, but we're going into Madhyamika Prasangika, you see? We're not in that scope.
I can see a pear being a pear and a peach being a peach, whether it's in a basket or not.
Yeah.
But I cannot see a thought being a thought that is not contained by and within a mind.
But what is a mind?
Yeah, but you're veering from the initial argument, which is that mind must come from mind, so then the same thought must come from the same thought. But I'm saying it's the state of mindness which encompasses various thoughts that gives rise to the state of mindness.
Just inconsistent with their own definition of self, the selfness of the mind.
The whatness?
Right, well, that's
The
kind
selfness.
Selfness?
The consistency of the mind, the essence of this argument, is that the proof of past and future minds is that mind can only have come from mind.
A previous moment of mind.
Previous moment of mind. So the extension of that argument is, if the thing that is mind itself, which we otherwise established as not being coextensive with its thoughts.
But nobody's posited a self-existent mind.
Well, then what is it that is flopping over? What is it that?
It's the idea and the
all
concept.
material cause.
Yeah.
If it is not. The
But that
mind.
goes into the other school.
So what? Yeah, I know, but this is where it gets slippery. So what is a mind?
Well, this is your argument, not mine.
Yeah.
Well, but you know, so we go back to the original question. Define a mind, and it's going to be according to what school? According to the mind-only school, you know, you have your alaya vijnaya, which holds all your karmic seeds, and there is a place where all your karmic seeds are stored because you have to have a karmic. You have to have a You have to have a basket for your karmic seeds in the mind-only school.
How did
Okay?
it start though? Is everything just infinity?
Yeah, it's an infinite existence.
Regarding that, the infinite thing, like when you talk about, for example, the acorn, the acorn obviously disappears for the oak tree.
It turns into the oak tree. Yeah.
Yeah. So
The
can
prior
you-
moment of mind turns into the current moment of mind.
But
I'm
can
sorry.
you say? But can you say, for example, you know, okay, you trace the tree down, but you can't find, like you dig up, and you're not going to find that acorn.
Right.
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 But you know that it came from something.
The tree came from something. Yeah.
From something, but that thing has disappeared. Can you say?
The mind is the same
Can
way.
you argue that you go back and you from mind to mind to mind, and then like let's say you get to conception, and you say that thing that created that mind at conception has disappeared. So it's something different from the mind that we.
Well, you don't even have to go back to conception. I mean, if you're looking at it from a physical sense, I mean, you know, when you're talking about physical stuff, it's the same idea. You know, the cells from the time of conception have changed into something else, and you know, died off, and new cells have been regenerated, etc. Right? But when we're talking about the mind, take any moment of mind. Take the mind of this second, right? It's just finished. It's gone. It's done. The next moment of mind has arisen, right?
Oh, okay.
In all its basketness.
So Bruce, so according to the school you're in, okay, you're going to define the basket more concretely or less concretely, okay? So we just have to decide which school we're in to talk to get clear on how we're talking about the basket, okay?
My
Which is the
basket's got
mind.
little pink green.
And whether you want pink
I think
flowers
that
on
settles all
it or
disputes.
not. So from the perspective of the highest school, okay? All right? The idea of a mind is just an idea. Okay? A mind is an idea and a construct. It's not self-existent, but we can talk about it and it can function. Okay? So when we talk about the mind, what is the mind? The mind is a collection of your karmic seeds. All of the potential ripenings of your karmic seeds. So we are. See, we're stepping out of this school, just to be clear, okay? From a higher perspective, I am the composite of my karmic imprints, okay? Which are ripening and not yet ripened, all right? So I am the sum total of all of my karmas, which are streaming through time, which is a concept, right? And it's functioning validly for me. As this kind of being, I am having a valid perception of linear time. I'm going through linear time, minute after minute, day after day, okay? I'm having linear experiences and perceptions, no problem. So that's how I'm perceiving it and talking about it, and it's functioning for me, okay? So I am the sum total of all of my karmic seeds, energetic impulses, latencies, potentials, whatever you want to call it, okay? I can talk about it as a body and mind. I can talk about it in a lot of different ways, okay? But the arising of that stuff, right, is me and my perception and my experience at this moment, which at this moment is linear time and a body and mind. In the next moment, that stuff could arise as a perception of omniscience and not linear time. Right?
See, there's the road. There's the road. The notion that the mind arises.
Well,
See,
no,
the-
perception.
The thing
Perception.
The thing that arises.
Okay.
The thing
Perception.
that arises is never the mind. The thing that arises.
Awareness.
No. The thing that arises is the artifact of the mind.
Well, the
as
idea.
expressed in stuffiness. Because you can take the number 3 and you can express it with the arrow numeral 3, or put 3 black stones side by side, or put it,
sure.
in a computer program,
Yeah.
or put that any one of, and all of them radically different as stuff, one
Yes.
from the other. But the
Yes.
information
Yes.
is exactly the same as it is conveyed from one basket of stuff to
Yes.
the next.
And yet
the
the-
information never arises. It's only the stuff that arises.
And yet there must be an awareness and a perception that says those rocks, those marks, those shapes are the number 3 and the idea of 3 representing blah, 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 blah.
Well, then you have to say that 3 was created by, that 3-ness was created by the mind.
On
But
and
if it's
on and on and on.
Which
It's
is,
just-
which is absurd. Let's say
It's
that
just
mind
another.
created a
It's just
triangle.
another shape.
No, but that's just like saying if a tree falls in a forest and no one is there. then
Can you hear a sound
Is-
of us
Yeah.
hand clapping?
Is
So who wants to
karma
say that an
separate
equilateral
than the
triangle
mind?
only
Like,
has
is it-
It's an idea.
equal interior angles of
so
60
like
degrees?
someone
The
in that
mind thinks so.
experiences and like an enlightened state
Yeah,
is their mind.
it has to be.
What
Are
would-
you arguing
what
about the
they wouldn't
forms of
experience
that?
No, you just,
Sorry,
it's,
come here.
but
Let me
it's-
do these guys.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Let's
the
calm
mind
down first.
notices a reality, and physical stuff express it. Okay, but the thing that the truth of the matter is never arises. It's
Well-
portrayed.
There is perception, and there is awareness, and there is construct, right?
Constructs arise.
So that's what we're talking about.
But a construct never made a triangle a triangle. It simply reported on the fact.
Okay, but nonetheless, it arose.
It arose. Triangle-ness was always
The
such.
construct came into being. It arose. It manifested, whatever you want to call it.
Triangle.
Does an
It
ant
was there.
perceive a triangle?
Triangle-ness was
But
not.
you're arguing about something different now because you're not arguing about mind. You're
He's telling
arguing
me
about
that-
self-existent properties.
He's telling me that there's an abstract mind independent of its thoughts, which is
I never said any such thing.
which dynamically gives rise to the next moment of mind as the Nerlangi you, as the singular cause of it.
I don't think I used any of those words.
Yes, you
You
did.
use that
But Stephen had a question. What's your question, Stephen?
No, I guess it's like, well, are the constructs, or no, that's not what I asked, but that's another thought. Is karma separate to your mind? Is an enlightened state of mind has no karma? Does it have karma? Does it experience?
So let's
like,
just,
how do you
yeah,
experience mind?
Yeah.
How does
so
mind?
so 2 levels of reality, right? Conventional and ultimate reality. Conventional reality is the reality we live in of constructs, ideas, conceptualizations, names, terms, and labels. However you want to talk about all that.
And that's all karma ripening, right?
That's where we are right now and what we're doing right now.
Sure.
Okay? The idea of karma, the idea of emptiness, the idea of virtue, those are all ideas and constructs and concepts and terms and names and labels, right? Which function and which are valid and which constitute our reality, right? Another level of reality, ultimate reality, state free of concepts and constructs and names and terms and labels. Okay? Very different reality, very different experience, very different way of being, right?
So would that be like meeting your mind?
That would be meeting ultimate reality because mind is a concept. If I say, it goes back to what you said, what's a mind? A mind is an idea, a construct, a term, a name, a label, okay? None of these things ultimately exist. Ultimately, reality is free of names and labels and terms and concepts and projections. What's that like? You have to experience it. Take a break. Good place to stop.
Do you want cookies, John?
I ate a cookie.
I know, but do you want more?